Washington minus to be clear. It isn't that hard to keep the government's lights on. Fights over short-term spending bills have long been used by Republicans and Democrats as proxies for broader policy fights. But with Republicans fully in control of Washington, President Trump has turned a sure thing into a major drama, with a Friday night deadline before much of the government shuts down. Congressional appropriators, who are always happy to spend money together, seemed on a glide path to quietly do so, until Mr. Trump belatedly intervened, insisting on using the bill to get a down payment on a wall at the Mexican border that even many Republicans are leery of, and that he has long insisted would be paid for by Mexico. Suddenly, a spending bill that was meant to be a mere legislative grace note to much larger health care and tax policy bills has become the centerpiece of another down-to-the-wire battle. The wall is a very important tool in stopping drugs from pouring into our country and poisoning our youth, and many others, Mr. Trump said Monday on Twitter. The president's early habit of tossing hornets into Republican policy picnics has hampered his agenda and demonstrated the lack of experience among his staff in working with Capitol Hill to get things done. His lack of early engagement on the health care bill helped lead to its demise, and his early efforts at a tax bill were disorganized. He announced he had won even though critical staff members and congressional leaders knew nothing of it. Those stumbles and his current flirtation with a government shutdown demonstrate a continued pattern of playing to his base rather than governing. Democrats, whose votes will be needed to pass any spending bill, and plenty of Republicans have no interest in building a wall, certainly not in paying for it with a short-term spending bill. Donald Trump threw a monkey wrench with the wall, said Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the Democratic leader. We believe that the Republican leaders should tell Donald Trump that we can do this at a later time. On Monday, as senators returned to Washington from a 2-week recess to confirm Sonny Perdue for Secretary of Agriculture, Republican congressional leaders were negotiating with White House officials, who have been pressing for wall funding and a mechanism to take some funding from the Affordable Care Act. The House returns on Tuesday. Mr. Trump is hardly the first president to fight with his party over major policy matters. President Andrew Johnson clashed with Congress over Reconstruction programs, which helped lead to his impeachment, and President Jimmy Carter's fights with fellow Democrats over nearly everything prompted Senator Edward M. Kennedy to challenge him for the party's nomination in 1980. President Barack Obama fought with coal state Democrats who sunk his climate change bill, and with war-weary members of his party over whether to launch airstrikes in Syria. The general dynamic to get congressional leaders aligned with the White House is often a challenge, but rarely impossible, said Patrick Griffin, a former aide to Senator Robert C. Byrd of West Virginia and a legislative director during President Bill Clinton's first term. This dynamic is only different in that the president is so unpredictable. What should be obvious is not a certainty. Counterproductive as his moves may appear, Mr. Trump is clearly eager for a victory, and funding for his wall would be one, at least with his base. His negotiating method appears to be to join the conversation late in the game, and pressure Congress via his beloved Twitter account, with references to campaign promises that were always long shots. The president is not beholden to the same constituencies as previous Republican presidents, said Ken Spain, a former spokesman for the National Republican Congressional Committee. That was a major asset for Trump as a candidate. But from a governing perspective, it can lead to competing priorities with the more conventional wing of the party. Mr. Spain added, to the extent the White House and Republicans on Capitol Hill can utilize a hand-in-glove approach, the likelihood for success increases dramatically. While many presidents bring advisors from their home state during their first term, they also tend to staff up with people wise to the ways of working with Congress. But like Mr. Carter's, Mr. Trump's inner circle is particularly full of close associates who have not spent time in Washington and have learned the hard way minus at the hands of lawmakers, often from their own party minus about what is and is not possible. They learn Congress is a co-equal branch of government, said former Senator Trent Lott, Republican of Mississippi and a one-time majority leader. What Congress has to do, and the Senate Majority Leader has to do, is say to the president of their own party sometimes is, "We appreciate your interest, but we are not going to do that here today. I did that with Bush sometimes, and Karl Rove did not like it, but I thought it was important to tell him what we could do and couldn't do." Indeed, Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky and the majority leader, warned the Trump administration soon after the election that the best course of action was to accept a spending bill that would have gotten the government through the rest of the fiscal year without the bills being slowed or sidelined by tax and health care legislation. His counsel was not heeded. Democrats support increased border spending, just not in the form of a wall. Let us all recognize that we have a responsibility to protect our borders, said Representative Nancy Pelosi of California, the House Minority Leader. The fact is that the wall is a dereliction of duty in doing that. As such, it is likely that Congress will try to come up with a bill that can please both parties and include new funding for the border with vague promises to work on the wall issue later in the year. To get to that point, it is also likely that a very short-term spending measure will have to be passed on Friday as a bridge to that final spending bill. However, should Mr. Trump decide to dig in, there could be a huge and largely needless fight over spending that distracts from the rest of his agenda. It is not going to happen in this bill, so I am not sure why they are making a sweat over it, Mr. Lott said. This is one of the places where they need to get this done, and it's easy, he added. They have to do health care and a tax bill and appropriations so that they can turn later this year to infrastructure. Because if they don't have health care and tax reform, there is going to be hell to pay at the next election.